take this seriously. All right, welcome back to another episode of TP100 Radio. I'm super excited for today's episode because we're back with one of my good friends, Amanda Ciprich, who is the T1D nutritionist on Instagram. And in case you needed like a little bit of a humbling experience today, can we walk them through what happened this morning as you're on your way to my house?
Yes. So I usually never leave my house in the morning because I do work from home. And if you notice, the background looks a little bit different today. We're not in Lizzie's closet anymore. And so I was leaving my house, you know, I had my backpack with like my work stuff and, you know, our whole like mental like diabetes diaper bag. And I forgot one important thing on my way here. That would be my insulin. So I called Lizzie when I was driving over, and I was like, hey, can you pack me a vial of insulin and a syringe because I forgot mine. And we planned at like going to Starbucks, and I was like, in my head I was like, oh my god, my blood sugar is gonna go up to 300 and I don't have my insulin, oh my god. And then I was like, wait, perks of having a friend with diabetes.
Here we are.
I can just ask Lizzie to give me some insulin. So Lizzie saved my butt this morning. But yes, even 10 years in, I am not perfect, and I also forget things all the time.
That's where we're at. It's like the equivalent, like I'm on the Omnipod, and it's just the equivalent to having the stupid PDM, which I'm so excited for the mobile bowl thing because then I'm like, I don't leave my phone usually because of the Dexcom. So once we have that, it'll be great. But
I lose my phone a million times. So I have an Apple Watch for like that reason. And I mostly use my Apple Watch for two functions. It's one, to see my Dexcom on my watch while I'm working, and two, to ping my phone when I leave it somewhere around the house. I'm like, those are majorly the two main features that I use. But when I was on Omnipod years ago, I would lose like the PDM, like it would be like on the bottom of a bag, and I would just remember like having like an absolute heart attack about it. But I'm excited for, you know, what that's gonna maybe look like for me, and whenever, you know, that order's decides to come in.
There's been a lot of insurance issues, but
drama, you know, the usual.
I've had a lot of like I had one time where I left my PDM in my makeup bag, which how it ended up there, no idea, but yeah, that's a story for another day too.
Yep.
But so if you don't know Amanda, she's been on the podcast a few times now. She is one of my very close friends. We both live in New Jersey. We met like 2 years ago now, and we were both like, you live in New Jersey? I live in New Jersey. We're 20 minutes away. Okay. And just immediate, you know, friendship from there. So I'm really excited that we are able to record this in person. But she is a registered dietitian, the face behind T1D Nutritionist. And like she mentioned, today we went and got Starbucks before this recording.
We did.
And it inspired a little bit of today's episode, which is just going to be all about kind of like the concept of things that we feel like we may have to give up or just are, you know, harder to bolus for, like getting drinks from Starbucks. Like there's been so many years where I'm like, oh, a drink from Starbucks or coffee or any kind of like drink other than water, I felt like I had to either avoid or it was just going to completely wreck my blood sugars for the entire day. So I feel like today is a really important conversation, and if you can't tell, we like talking about food. So that's where we're at.
Yeah, I often hear from, like, kind of echoing what you just said, like, from a lot of my clients, is, like, a lot of them have a difficult time getting over, like, the mental hump of, like, dosing for something. A lot of times in the community, I'll hear, like, phrases like, oh, this food was, like, worth the insulin, or, like, something's, like, not worth the insulin. And, like, that, like, phrase can be, like, really...
Yeah.
I find that, like, you know, there's no problem in, like, needing insulin because, you know, that's what we need. Right. But, you know, if we didn't have diabetes and, you know, taking insulin wasn't always on the forefront of our mind, we sometimes wouldn't be so conscious about how we're dosing for things or when we're dosing for things, because our pancreas would just be doing that, but it doesn't. So sometimes it really makes you second guess your decisions to have something. And I think in a way I'm almost blessed fact. I am like lucky that I have type 1, but in a way it has made me more mindful about the foods that I'm eating. But I also feel like that could be a really double-edged sword sometimes, where you're almost too aware of what you're eating all the time, every single day, for the rest of our existence. It can be really overwhelming and kind of tricky to navigate that.
Right. Yeah, no, that's so true, because like before, I mean, I was diagnosed when I was 19. Before that, I would get a cup of Dunkin'. Before, that's when I was a Dunkin' girl. I'm now a Starbucks girl. But I would get, a hazelnut coffee from Dunkin' every single morning, and didn't pay any attention to it. Fill it up with all the syrups. I don't care. It was fine. Then being diagnosed with type 1, now I suddenly had to think about, okay, not only how many carbs are in this, but, the flavoring, the caffeine, how much I'm drinking, like just all these different factors, which got really, really confusing as somebody who's told, limit your amount of carbs, or, you're drinking sugar, all these kind of narratives that are centered around just the food in front of us.
And something that I think is really important for like this conversation is like, our needs are allowed to change. So like, just because like you want to have like a hazelnut latte doesn't mean that every time you go to Dunkin' or Starbucks that like you have to have the one with like all of the sugar and all of the toppings and all of the syrups. Like, you can alternate with your approaches. But I find that a lot of times we have like this very black and white mentality. It's like either like we're having like the full thing, or we're having like black coffee. So, and it's like there's a lot of like nuance that like goes in between that, and I think that's where the conversation like really needs to happen. It's like that in between like gray area. Yeah,
no, that's so true, because even now, like thinking about it, like my I don't know if this happens to anybody else, but like my tastes have literally changed since being diagnosed with type 1, and I don't know if that's just because I've opted for the lower sugar options or whatever it is, but now like getting a regular drink from Starbucks, I'm like, this is so sweet. I don't even like it anymore. I don't enjoy it. So now I am able to find a little bit more of that balance, but it wasn't always that way. I thought I had to go for the non-fat milk with the sugar-free syrups, with like the watered down, big cup, So first of all, let's start with like, what are the different factors that we even have to consider when looking at something like I have my matcha latte right here in front of me.
Yeah, so some of the things that I would be considering is like the drink, like the order itself. So like I know Starbucks matcha is unfortunately like sweetened, so like the scoops of matcha already have sugar in it. The drink itself have like syrups and stuff, so it's like considering what baseline, like the amount of sugar that's going to be in that order. And also looking at that from a very like non-judgmental and like neutral lens. Like, this is a fact that this one has 36 grams of carbs and like 20 something grams of added sugars. Like, okay. But other facts would be like, how fast are you going to drink that matcha? Lizzie has been nurturing this for like over an hour, and I'm like slightly concerned she might go low.
If you hear me stumbling on my words, that's why.
But like if Lizzie were to have drank that in like 5 minutes, that volume of like concentrated sugar is going to respond very differently on your blood sugar than if you like nurturing it over this period of time. So like how fast you're drinking these things also impacts it. Definitely. The size, so like ordering a grande versus like a venti or whatever size that you choose is going to play an impact, because it's going to be like more potential carbs impacting your blood sugar. And then also the foods that you eat alongside the Starbucks, so like having it alone, having it by itself, are going to look very different on your blood sugar as well.
Yeah, and again, I think that's like something that we're not really taught to consider, because again, it's always carbs and insulin that's beaten to our brains since day one of the diagnosis, which understandably so. Like, it's a very overwhelming diagnosis, so we're kind of taught that simplified version, but at what point do we start considering things like this? So I'm glad that that's coming to the table. But I mean, even when it comes to like handling these kinds of things, like, what's been your experience with this kind of scenario?
So again, I kind of see like the two extremes. Either it's like, well, I'm gonna go to Starbucks, I'm gonna order this latte, I know my blood sugar is gonna go to 300, I'm just gonna deal with it later. And a lot of times I see like with clients that like they'll dose for it after they get it, or like they chug it and they're not even home yet. And then I also see the other extreme where it's like, well, I know that like this pumpkin spice latte is going to wreck my blood sugars, but I don't deserve to have it, or like I don't want to deal with that blood sugar mess. So I don't deserve to have it. I'll just get a black coffee. And like the intention behind both of those deserves to kind of be explored a little bit. So if you're on like the side where it's like, well, I know my blood sugar is going to go up to 300, so like doesn't matter what I do, that's just what's going to happen. And that's not true. If we know something's going to happen, we can act proactively instead of reactively.
Right.
So it can be something like taking your pre-bolus even sooner. If you know you're going to order a latte that has like 30 grams of carbs and sugar in it, like you know your blood sugar is going to spike up heavily, so maybe you need a longer pre-bolus timing. Maybe you decide to sip it like over a period of time. That's one of my favorite strategies, to be honest, because then you actually get to enjoy it longer. Because like, not for nothing, but like I could chug a matcha latte in like 2 sips. Like I mean, like they're mostly ice anyway, but like you can seriously chug it in 2 sips, but then it's like, wow, it's over already. That stinks. But when you sip it over a period of time, you also get to enjoy it and really like bask in it and like really taste it, rather than like slurp it down and then it's over and done with.
Right.
And then you're dealing with your blood sugar shooting up to the moon. And then also like potentially eating the Starbucks with a meal. So like at Starbucks, for example, like they have egg white bites, they have sandwiches. Whether you get it to have like your afternoon coffee and drink it with your lunch, those are all helpful strategies to potentially offset that added sugar that's in it. So adding protein, adding carbs, adding fiber are all things that are going to slow down that potential blood sugar rise from the coffee syrups and sugars and stuff
So much.
itself. And of course, the last strategy would potentially be like making substitutions. So this one also has nuance because, you know, there's going to be times where like it's pumpkin spice season and like for some people, like having the regular version of a pumpkin spice latte may be what brings them like the most joy. And that's like really like, you know, their favorite thing about this season is having like a regular pumpkin spice latte, right? But for someone, maybe like for you, for example, like the 3 pumps of pumpkin like syrup, whatever that they use, maybe too sweet. So you're okay with having the adding in like sugar-free vanilla or doing less pumps. But for someone else, that may, you know, ruin the whole experience for them. And that doesn't mean it's right or wrong or like you're better than them or whatever. But it just means that it's different, and different is okay. So no matter what strategy you choose, like, yes, you can use less sugar. That's always a feasible option. But if you're doing it and it's robbing you joy, then you can lean into those other strategies like food pairing, ordering a smaller size, sipping on it slowly, doing a longer pre-bolus. Like those are all things that are feasible rather than just being like, I'm gonna go up to 300 and
Screw it.
whatever.
No, I like that you are adding those. Again, it's all about options. And I think kind of like we were talking about this in the last podcast episode, but when it comes to food and even like drinks like this, there's so much more to the experience than just the food in front of you. So like for me with Starbucks, like most of the time, I don't really get it too often now, but it's more of like when I'm out with friends, or there's a lot of times where Jordan will come home and he just wants to surprise me with a latte. And now Jordan being Jordan, he doesn't remember that I always do like half the pumps because, again, just my taste preferences. So he'll bring home like a chai latte with all of the pumps, and like me in my head, I'm like, okay, pause, let's like figure out the full bolus. But there's still ways to actually add that enjoyment by those strategies that you just recommend: a longer pre-bolus, sipping on it longer. I try to I wish I knew the PFF method earlier, because in high school, or no, sorry, college, I would every single morning get a venti skinny vanilla latte, because again, I thought that I had to get the skinny version, with a bagel, and I was surprised every time. I'm like, okay, I'm taking my go-to is like
300 every morning.
literally every morning. I literally
I can see it now.
I plugged in 60 carbs, and just don't know how I got to that number. It just was the number. I think we all have that number that we just automatically plug in. And I was so surprised when I'd be sitting in class and I'd be test my blood sugar and be like 270. I'm like, but I bolused.
But I bolused.
Like, what?
How could this ever happen to me?
Right. So I think it's just, yeah, it's really important that we have these different strategies. Now, for somebody who's kind of, okay, like let's just say they're like me, like somebody brought them coffee, or they're in a scenario where they can't really sit down and add as much maybe intention into that scenario. Like, what are ways that they can still be mindful about it without having to feel like all consumed?
Yeah, so it really depends on like the scenario, but just knowing that you have a bunch of options is, I think, really helpful. Because if you were to straight up bring me a latte and I like wasn't expecting it, like 10 years ago, I would have been like, thanks, it's going in the trash. Like, thank you so much, but like I can't have that
now $7 latte.
Yeah. Sorry. But now, like, you know, we can pick and choose those moments. So if you were to bring me that latte, and like it's a special day, we're here in a studio, and like it's not every day we get to do this. So having Starbucks or having like a sugary drink is something special. So I could be like, you know what, Lizzie just showed up, I didn't know this was happening. Yes, my blood sugar may go a little bit higher. I can try pre-bolusing as long as possible, but instead what I may try is like again, sipping on it over a longer period of time. So like us having this conversation, we've both been sitting here like nurturing our drinks, and that's a really helpful strategy, because you're able to kind of converse, have that like normalcy of like a conversation without like, you know, I think like something that we can all kind of attest to or have experienced at one point is like you're sitting around a table with a bunch of people, everyone gets their food, and then you're sitting there like, gotta wait my 15 minutes for that insulin to kick in.
Start the timer.
And it's like, that can be really like defeating, but just allowing yourself to, you know, give yourself insulin, sip it, have a conversation, and be really mindful that that's the strategy that you're leaning into, because that's what you have in that moment. You know, we don't live in a perfect world where like we can pre-bolus, we can always do food pairing, we can always sip on our thing. Like, that's, our world isn't rainbows and butterflies all the time, but we can kind of change our priorities. Like, so in this moment right now, it's like spending time with you, recording in this studio. Like, the Starbucks is there, but it's like not the star of the moment right now. So it's like you can kind of have both things, and like maybe later on today, like I'm not going to order like another sugary beverage today. I'm like, I don't know when the next time I'm going to go to Starbucks really is. But being able to give yourself permission to be in that moment, rather than like, I'm just going to sit here and like...
watch my Dexcom slowly and...
and then you're not even enjoying that moment because you're so distracted by what your blood sugar is doing that, you know, it's okay for your priorities to shift. Between like, you know, for the most part, I'm home in the comfort of my home, knowing the carb counts of like the foods that I'm eating, and having that like comfort of like measuring cups and scales and like foods that I know how to dose for, versus like when I'm eating out, you have all those things kind of stacked up against you. So it's like, instead of being like, well, I'm at home, and usually when I'm at home, my blood sugars stay between this and this range, and then applying those same standards when you go out,
it's not realistic.
And then you're just setting yourself up to feel really frustrated at yourself in the process, and like that's just not fair. So it's like you can reset those expectations, where it's like setting reasonable expectations as well, where you know, allowing yourself to go up to a certain number, but you know, if it does go over, it's okay,
It
because
happens.
it's not, you know, every day you go to a podcast recording studio or something. So I think that's all like some just important nuances to kind of consider, working through like that all or nothing like mentality of like, I'm either having it all or I'm having absolutely nothing.
Right.
We can kind of look into those like little nuances throughout.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because like one thing that I think that takes a huge mindset shift too, of like, okay, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. But one thing that we teach our clients is just having that, just to your point, having that MVC, that minimum viable commitment. Like, okay, my MVC right now is that we are talking and I'm going to sip this slowly, or maybe it's that I'm going to order something with protein. Like, we can have that one thing that we'll do that supports our blood sugars, and let that be just okay and be in the moment. But I know that like one part of this conversation that we came up with was a lot about the customization. So like for me, again, like I don't normally, like if I'm doing a pumpkin spice latte, I'm going to have a grande latte with 1 pump of pumpkin. I'm going to call it a day, because that to me is sufficient. But the system, in the sense of like the system being Starbucks and their menu, isn't necessarily set up for success in that route. So can you dive into a little bit about that?
Yes. So anyone who has ever used like the Starbucks app or like has looked at their menu, when you go online on the Starbucks app or whatnot, and you look up a matcha latte or a pumpkin spice latte or whatever drink, it's going to give you like the nutrition facts for like the standard drink. But if you wanted to order like a pumpkin spice latte with 1 pump pumpkin and 2 pumps sugar-free vanilla, with instead of 2% milk, you want coconut milk or almond milk or whatever, it's not going to update the nutrition facts for you. And that's where like it can get really frustrating for us, because, you know, okay, 3 pumps of pumpkin has how many carbs? Like we don't know that, and it can be really frustrating. So I did you guys all a favor.
This was the longest process.
Initially this was just supposed to be like a handout that was just like, okay, 1 pump of like vanilla syrup has X carbs, like, and then I'm not really a coffee drinker, I'm a tea drinker, so like I did not understand why now I understand why Starbucks does not have a nutrition calculator, because I carb counted almost 900 menu items from the Starbucks menu. Lizzie has like a background in engineering, and she's also a Virgo, if you don't know that.
Love Google spreadsheets.
So she helped me with creating like this calculator, and essentially it's like drag and drop. So it's like you choose the drink, you choose what type it is, you choose how much milk is in the serving, what type of milk, the types of syrups, all of that stuff, anything that you add, like whether it's a cold foam or this or that, and it will give you your carb count in addition to the amount of protein and the amount of fat in your drink. And in addition to, you know, that calculator being really helpful, so you kind of like can even compare like what a regular drink would look like compared to like what potentially a lower sugar option can look like, I think can be really helpful in like just how we take our insulin and just general awareness, because like I was shocked like going through some of the menus to see how much like added sugar was actually in some of these drinks. I was like, holy moly, that's it was kind of crazy. But in addition, I also have like drink ideas to potentially try out that are like lower carb, if that's something that you're looking for. And then if not, I also will list out some of those tips that we discussed. So I have about 10 different tips so for you to consider when dosing for something like Starbucks. So you can, I think like my tagline is like, figure out like your order or whatever, so like you can keep like your taste buds and your blood sugars happy.
I love that.
That way, again, like you can have your cake and eat it too. That way you can order whatever drink you want from Starbucks and still keep your blood sugars in range, and just it can be an overall pleasant experience rather than stressful and intimidating.
Yeah, no, honestly though, because like I said, like in college I would always get those skinny vanilla lattes, and then but like looking at the app, there's always like I would get sugar-free syrup but whole milk. And there was no option for that on the app. It was either skinny vanilla latte with like non-fat milk or the whole vanilla latte with whole milk. And they're like, so I would just say, okay, I guess I'm going to merge the two and take the average. But like going into Starbucks today, you doing the calculations for the green tea latte, we got to see, okay, the green tea latte with, I think it was like no syrup and no cold foam, what was like 16 carbs. And then we did the math, or we did the calculation for, okay, I got the green tea latte with syrup with the cold foam, it was 36 carbs. So being able to actually see that number and reference it for my dosing decisions felt so empowering. So I'm really excited that you came up with this resource for everybody.
I wouldn't have been able to do it without your assistance, because I was looking at like all the lines and I was like, SOS, please help me. So it's definitely a teamwork effort, but I think it's really helpful to have something like that, because everybody kind of loves some Starbucks from time to time, and it can be really helpful.
Yeah, and it just gives us more tools to be proactive and have more options. So thank you for doing that. Like all things, I'm going to have that link in the show notes so you can check it out. If you haven't checked out Amanda on Instagram, like you can see all of her Starbucks tips on her feed. It's so impressive. I see them in Facebook the screenshots in Facebook groups all the time. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing this with us.
Thanks for having me.
Just in time.